Here we are, folks. Another interesting evening's conversation on DFA. Great to have you with us, and welcome to a number of Adam's followers who've also come across tonight. Really appreciate Adam spreading the message and having you on. So it's great to spend some time in DFA land. We're going to have an interesting conversation tonight. I'll just put the pre-show on for a moment or two just to allow people to find their way in. And of course, we're going to have a conversation centered around what's going on with digital currencies and particularly Bitcoin, of course, with the halving. But we'll probably have some broader, more philosophical conversations. Adam and I both are somewhat philosophically wired, so that's always good. Just before I bring him in, I will just remind you that the dogs are here. They've had their walks. They've had their lunch. They're now sleeping it off. So hopefully they'll keep quite quiet. We were just discussing whether we should take the dogs' collars off because, of course, they both rattle a bit when they shake. But for me, that's part of the charm of having dogs. And here is a view of the studio for those who may not have seen it before, with Adam Tito over there ready to come in. See him on the screen. I've got the multi-view up there. I've got my chat there. I've got another multi-view over there. And then I've got some charts and things wired up here, and I've got another computer over here that controls the streaming. So that's the way the show works. And of course, as normal, we'll be able to take your questions, and you'll be able to steer the agenda of the show. So it isn't just all pre-packaged. It is very much, we make it up as we go along, which is, I think, part of the charm of what we do. Anyway, with that introduction out of the way, I'm going to take the pre-show off. I'm going to run the start of the show, and we're back in just a moment. Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream on the 23rd of April 2024. It's Martin North here from Digital Finance Analytics. Great to have you on the show this evening, and thanks very much for spending some of your time with me. Got Adam on tonight, of course, to talk about all things Bitcoin related and more. Before I bring him in, let me just remind you, as I always do, that we don't provide specific financial or legal advice. This is a general conversation only. We do moderate the chat, but please play nice, and also feel free to throw your questions and comments in. The more the merrier. I don't necessarily follow all the conversations, but if you want to ask a question, or indeed if you want to get my attention, use @WalkTheWorld. I've enabled Super Chat, and the possibility there is to get your question top of the list, or indeed make a contribution to what we do around here. And as always, appreciated. Contributions are greatly received. Now, I have to tell you that Adam has just disappeared. So he was on, ready to come in, and he just disappeared. So we'll make it up for a little while and see whether he comes back in. I think he probably will. He was having an interesting challenge with his internet connection a little earlier on, and we thought we fixed it all. And then blow me, he just flashed off. So watch this space. Anyway, what I wanted to do today was to talk a little bit about the halving and post the halving. And I do have some information which I'm going to start talking to at the moment, and make sure that we give Adam plenty of time to find his way back in. I guess a good place to start the conversation is to just reflect a little bit on what's going on with regards to the price of Bitcoin. It's quite interesting that if you look at the current chart, I'll just put this up in. This is the US. Whoops, hang on, that's gone as well now. Having great fun tonight. So the US chart is quite interesting, but this chart I think probably shows it quite well. Which, hang on, let's go there. There we go. Yeah, so this is actually a bit of a long-term view of what's going on. And you can see there that we had the first halving back in 2012 when the price of Bitcoin was $12.50. The second halving was in 2016 on July the 9th at $638.50. The third halving was in May 11, 2020, May 11th, and that was 8,475. And then, of course, the last one in April 2024 was at 61,067. So it dropped back from its high prior to the halving. And that actually is quite an interesting conversation with regard to what happened. Now, I'm just going to see whether I can get Adam back in. Just hang on with me. Just seeing whether I can get Adam. He's connected back in through Zoom. It's connecting to audio and can't hear you yet, he says. This is quite an interesting challenge. Normally Zoom is brilliant, so I'm not quite sure. Mr. Stokes, are you there? Can you hear me? I can't hear you at the moment. Connecting to audio. Hang on. Just to show everybody that Adam is in the room, but his audio is currently not connected. It's gone away again. Okay. Sorry about this. We have a bit of a technical problem at the moment. So as I was saying, it's interesting to look back at the halving there. And let me just try and bring Adam back in. Just hang on once again. Okay, I've now brought him back in again. We'll see whether we can. It's Cookie says the 56K modem's playing up. Yeah, well, he's got a pretty good internet connection. I don't know quite what it is, but let's just see whether he comes in now. Just bear with me. There's something, it's connecting to audio and can't hear you yet.
Yes. There we are. Surely third time must be a charm.
Hey!
it wouldn't be a show together if we didn't have some type of technical difficulty.
No, it's fine. Well, welcome, and I'm glad you finally made it.
Great to be here.
I don't know whether you heard any of what I said, but I was actually just going through one of the charts that I put up, which was in fact this one, which just showed the story of the halvings over the history, right? Which is quite interesting because it shows you that the fourth halving, prices have come off from their peak prior to halving. But I guess a good place to start, Adam, would be to just talk a little bit about what is halving, what does it mean, and what is the significance of halving? Because this is actually quite an important event, and it's wired into the way that Bitcoin actually is working.
Absolutely. So it's a fundamental process of Bitcoin's release of the supply into the greater ecosystem. I'll start with what halving is not. Halving is not half price Bitcoin. Halving is not the reduction of the supply of Bitcoin. And halving is not the amount of people who are in it. And I mention those things that it's not because many people within my space have said, hey, we're going to get a half price Bitcoin, or the supply is going to cut in half. That's not what happens. What happens is, of course, Bitcoin is released into the ecosystem, into the circulating supply every 10 minutes. It's actually every certain amount of blocks, but it works out to be every 10 minutes. And when Bitcoin was first released, every 10 minutes, you would have 50 Bitcoin released into the circulating supply. Every 10 minutes, 50 released, 50 released. After 210,000 blocks, which roughly works out to be 4 years, that is cut into half, which means every 10 minutes, 25 Bitcoin are released. And those 25 Bitcoin are released not just to anyone, they are released to the miners who enable and secure the network behind everything that is Bitcoin. And for the technical gurus out there, it happens on an algorithm called the SHA-256 algorithm. Another 4 years pass, and that supply, that release gets cut in half again. So we've gone from 50 to 25 to 12.5 to 6.25 to where we are now to 3.125, which means every 10 minutes, only 3.125 Bitcoin is released. In a slightly more macro picture, every day, 900 Bitcoin is released, but now it's 450 Bitcoin. We've just gone from 900 a day to 450 a day. And what that does is it controls the supply or reduces the amount of Bitcoin that's coming into the ecosystem, which is the complete opposite to fiat, where fiat is different in two ways. One, there is no maximum supply of fiat. So what's the maximum supply of fiat? Unlimited. What's the maximum supply of Bitcoin? 21 million. That's the big difference there. The second big difference comparative to fiat is that fiat's printing rate or release rate, if you will, increases over time. We can see as time goes by, more and more fiat is released at a faster rate, increasing not only the total supply, but also increasing the supply or the flow into the ecosystem. So that is why, if you look at the price of Bitcoin comparative to everything, this might be a bold statement, but I'll put it straight out there. Everything that you own, no matter whether it's gold or houses or big other coins or any sort of commodity stock, physical thing or digital thing, when it's comparative to Bitcoin, everything you own is going down in value comparative to Bitcoin. And that's because Bitcoin is becoming stronger, worth more. There's more people buying into this. And I mentioned before, Martin, there's now only 450 Bitcoins being released into the ecosystem. There is about to be a massive supply shock on the world where there's more people, more institutions, more companies and nations who are trying to buy Bitcoin well in excess of what is being mined every day. And I put out there also, just because 450 are being mined every day, it doesn't mean that 450 are being sold from the miners. So the question really comes to, where do we get this Bitcoin from? There's three ways to obtain Bitcoin. Well, there's many ways to obtain it, but where does it kind of come from? Well, first of all, it comes from the code. The miners bring it up from the code, but once it's into the ecosystem, you can get it on an exchange, you can get it over the counter, or you can get it peer-to-peer. For example, if I do work for you, you pay me in Bitcoin. And I've had this model applied to my company for many, many years because I didn't need the cash flow, because I didn't need the infrastructure, because I've already got financial backing in other areas. So what's actually happened to me over years, as an example, I've mined Bitcoin, I've bought Bitcoin, but the big holdings for me in Bitcoin is that I've earned Bitcoin. So over the last 7 to 8 years, all the work that I've done in this space has been paid to me in Bitcoin. My reward has been in Bitcoin. And as a result, all the work that I've done in the past has now paid me exponentially because what I've been paid in has gone up in value so much. Had I accepted fiat or gold or property or anything comparative to Bitcoin, it would not have gone up. I'm well ahead. And this isn't just about me. This is about everyone who's adopting the Bitcoin standard. The Bitcoin standard moving forward is a new hard sound decentralized currency or money or store of value. Some people want to say it's one thing or the other or not. It can be how you want to use it. For me, it's a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and a store of value. For others, no, it's just a store of value. For others, it's a speculative tool. For others, it's something to build upon on the most secure network system in the world. Bitcoin is many things, but what it is not is just one thing.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize a couple of really, really important points, right? Because there is this big tussle going on between those in the traditional finance end of the spectrum who basically say, well, at least I can feel the notes and what have you, right? Whereas I can't see Bitcoin. Whereas on the other end, you've got those in the digital world say, well, hang on, you've got to understand the fiat currencies are continuing to be devalued. Why? Because more and more of it's being created. And that's the problem with fiat, because there's no fundamental value anchor attached to it. And as a result of that, you've got this interesting contradiction between these two worldviews, right? About which is more safe. And it's interesting that in a situation where over recent weeks, we've actually had the situation where markets were going very significantly higher and then have come back a little bit. Bitcoin was going higher and has come back a little bit. And the other interesting and confusing factor for me, at least, is we're now seeing the spot ETFs that are actually existing, certainly in the US, and are going to be, I think, proliferating, which means that a lot of the ETF transaction throughput are now actually run by the big financial firms rather than by individuals. So we've also got this really interesting contention between what the pure idea around Bitcoin was and how Bitcoin is being used within the financial system, the traditional financial system. So the two worlds, although they're actually different, they're sort of interconnected more. And so one of the interesting questions is, in past halvings, because of the fact that now the miner gets rewarded less, that's tend to create the value because of the supply-demand disequilibrium on the Bitcoin side. Interesting question. Will it happen again this time?
Yeah, great question. Let me go to the first part. So digital versus physical. We have to accept as a society that we're already digital. I can prove it on multiple counts. Everyone, most people are already tapping and paying everywhere they go. Banks are closing down their ATMs. Banks are closing down their branches. And then, as you can see repeatedly, even when the branches exist, you can't get your cash out of there because some branches don't even hold cash. So you must accept, and you and I, as many know, we came together on fighting against the cash ban where the government wanted to take cash out of society. Now, we stopped it in the sense that we lobbied the government enough to stop it making a law about it. But the reality is it's still happening. There is way more digital fiat than physical fiat. And when we talk about doing a print, it's not necessarily going to the printing presses and printing money. It's just putting zeros on a screen, adding to the existing supply of all fiat out there. So whether we like it or not, and it's a tragedy, fiat is the cash is slipping away from everything that we know, whether it's at the shops. There are many places, if you think a while ago, it's like, we don't accept FPOS here. We don't accept card. Now it's the other way. There's many shops that say, we don't accept cash here. I keep seeing that sign more and more often now that many shops don't deal in cash. You can see government shop fronts don't deal in cash. If I go to pay my registration bill at a government shopfront, they say, we don't accept cash here. This is an Australian government shopfront issuing an Australian government bill, and they won't take Australian government issued tender. They won't take their own money. Then we can see ATMs being removed everywhere. We can see branches not issuing cash. The list goes on and on. The idea of being able to touch money is something that is drifting into a faraway memory. So then we move to the next part. Do we want a physical cash or a digital cash? Well, we kind of want both, but we have to accept that arguments aside. So then we go to the next step and say, well, do we want an unlimited digital cash or a fixed supply digital cash? And of course, we want a fixed supply, because if it's unlimited, they're going to keep printing it digitally, and we're going to have inflation. That's what inflation is caused by. Inflation is not caused by you and I going to the shop and buying a loaf of bread. Inflation is caused by the inflation of the money supply, where the physical or digital printing presses go burr and more money comes into the economy. If I take money out of my bank account and go buy a loaf of bread, that doesn't increase the total supply in the Australian economy. It may change the circulating supply, but it doesn't change the total supply. So that we have to ask ourselves as a society, left or right, young or old, male or female, black or white, we all need to come together and say, do we want an unlimited money or do we want a limited money? And the limited money, I should emphasize this, it doesn't mean that people can't touch it. It just means that the government can't keep printing it. And a limited money or a fixed supply money, the argument is, well, hang on, we need to print more money so more people can get their hands on it. No, with a digital money, a Bitcoin, as an example, can be divided into 100 million parts. Just as you have 100 cents in a dollar, you have 100 million Satoshis in a Bitcoin. But even then, because it's digital, you can break that down into micro Satoshis. Now, some people who haven't grasped this concept yet, and it's okay because we're not taught about money, they say, well, hang on, Adam, if I've just broken one Bitcoin into 100 million parts, you've just been fiat and you've just increased the supply. No, I haven't. It's the same. This is a real silver coin in my hand. And I give this example, not to be condescending, but some people don't grasp this. This is a real ounce of silver in my hand. Now, if I break this piece of silver into two pieces, have I just doubled my supply of silver? No, of course not. It's still the same ounce of silver. It's just in two pieces. If I break it into four pieces, I still have 1 ounce of silver. It's just now 4 people can touch it. Either one person can hold all 4 pieces or 4 people can touch it. If I extrapolate that into the digital space, if I break this silver coin into 100 million pieces, that means 100 million people can get access or touch this or move this. But of course, I can't do that with a physical asset, because if I broke this piece of silver into 100 million parts, it would be microscopic and I wouldn't be able to see it. So divisibility is not the same as inflation. Divisibility is simply breaking something into little pieces. And the power of digital is we can take any asset, a Bitcoin as an example, and break it into little pieces so more people can access it and move it around. Now, as we keep breaking it down and there's a high demand on that, each little piece actually becomes worth more and more and more. Now we move to the second part of your question, with the financial institutions coming in here using their old tactics into a new money. Number one, we cannot discriminate against them, because why? Bitcoin is non-discriminatory. It is open, neutral, borderless, censorship resistant. And that neutral part means anyone can be part of it. If you're the poorest person or the richest person, Bitcoin does not discriminate. Now, some people get upset that their big boys are coming in here and playing their games with it. But here's the thing. It doesn't change the rules of Bitcoin. The rules of Bitcoin are there are 21 million and that's it. There are block rewards that are released every 10 minutes and no one can change that. No one can change the supply. No one can change the algorithm. No one can get more than others unless they earn it legitimately or create some type of crime where they rob it from the people, which I would argue that's what inflation is, when they keep printing your money, printing the money and stealing value from your bank account. But Bitcoin in itself is completely blind to who uses it. So we should never say, well, hang on, Bitcoin's only for these people, it's not for those people, because then straight away we've gone back to a fiat. We've gone back to a discriminatory closed money. Bitcoin is open, it is neutral, borderless, censorship resistant, and immutable. Therefore, anyone can be part of it. But it doesn't change the architecture of Bitcoin when the big boys get into it and they start trading it as an ETF. What it also is it's a bit of a Trojan horse. Allow me to explain. Bitcoin is so pure, so fair, so open, so borderless, censorship resistant and so forth, that you may come into this space saying, well, we're going to use it for this. But once you adopt it, you've got this open, borderless, neutral censorship money that is fair to anyone and everyone. And so although greed may get you into this space, what happens is people come for the Lambo and they stay for the revolution or the evolution. For example, most people come into Bitcoin, as a matter of fact, not all, but most come in because they want to get rich. I'm not shy to say that, and I won't deny that many people come into Bitcoin because they want to make a profit. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. People go to work to make money. People invest in the stock exchange to make money. People buy gold they think they're making money, but they're really protecting themselves against inflation. And in many instances, most things that we do outside of family is about money. But even then, if we have a good family or we want to look after our family, we need money to do so. So in the first instance, people come into Bitcoin to make money. Okay. But then what they realize, if they don't have a background in finance, they're like, well, hang on a second. Why is Bitcoin so different to the other money? And the fundamental difference is one is scarce and one is unlimited. And then you actually start to get this scope creep of like, hang on a second, I just came here to get a Lamborghini. But now I realize I've been part of the biggest Ponzi scheme in the history of humanity, which is the US dollar and everyone who has to feed off this to prop up this currency. The only way, and all fiats are guilty of this, the only way fiat holds its value is if more and more and more people buy into it, just as a Ponzi scheme. Now, you might argue the same is for Bitcoin, and you might argue the same is for real estate. But the difference is Bitcoin has a fixed supply, and Bitcoin doesn't make different rules for different people, whereas fiat does. Fiat has an unlimited supply, but it makes different rules for different people. For example, if I were to print fiat, I would go to jail. But if government, central banks, or retail banks, you can put a different spin on it any way you want, but those three entities at the top, if they print money, either through issuing bonds to get money that never existed, or through fractional banking, They not only are allowed to do it, but they get protected when it all goes terribly wrong. So this is the big thing that people start to realize, hang on a second, I've been part of that big Ponzi scheme, which is fiat. Inflation is through the roof. When inflation goes up, they don't blame themselves for printing the money. They blame me for buying a loaf of bread. So then they realize, hang on, I want to exit from that system. I want to go to a new system. Now, whether that new system in Bitcoin means it's a currency or a store of value or a medium of exchange or a unit of account, it can be all of those things and any of those things and all of those things, but we shouldn't get bogged down in the debate of what it should be. Bitcoin is open. Bitcoin is creating new possibilities for many people in many different ways, and I'm so excited to be part of it.
Very, very interesting. And I just want to put up this slide, Adam. This is actually the US debt burden, debt to GDP, and also the forecast. This is based on the latest US Treasury, right? Because I think this is a very, very important context, right? And there's a thing called the debt clock, which shows that it's ticking up, ticking up, ticking up. But this chart shows you what's been happening since the year 2000. And essentially, we've had significant amounts of money creation, and they do that by issuing bonds, and then those bonds go into the system, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see there that it's forecast to continue. And there is no real intent within the US environment to trim that. And we've also got similar trends in many other countries too. So what this actually means is you've got this significant rise in the volume, and therefore the actual value of every dollar that you actually have got is being devalued exactly as the supply goes up, because effectively, supply demand. So you can argue that the price of houses goes up, not because it's worth more, it's just because the value of the money is worth less. And that's the immutable problem that we've got on the fiat side of the world. And there is no intent amongst governments from anywhere that I can see to tackle this fundamental debt creation problem. And by the way, it's very easy for banks to create debt by essentially just, creating more electronic money, which then goes into the system, as well as issuing bonds. So this is the fundamental problem. And this is where we lost the anchor to gold years and years ago. That allowed then this volume of money to just expand and mushroom forever. And there's no way back.
There's a book, I'm sure you've read it, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And The Creature from Jekyll Island is a very powerful book. It's a long book, and it explains how basically the birth of the Federal Reserve and how this Ponzi scheme really played out. And what's interesting about, about 3/4 of the way through the book, there's a paragraph in there that it keeps repeating in my mind. You read a book and you get lots of parts out of it, and there's parts that you forget, and you read it later and it's like, oh yeah, I forgot that. But there's one part I won't forget. This debt that we speak about, where governments issue bonds and debt is created, it's in fact not debt, because debt implies that there was something that existed in the first place that you could borrow against. There was nothing there. What the book describes this debt as is in fact a commission to those at the top of the Ponzi scheme, or those at the top who are playing this game. It is a commission because the money never existed. The money, they even say in the book that it came out of thin air. It's like, well, no, even air has more value than this money, because at least there's a finite supply of money. Air. But when it comes to money, in this sense, fiat, there is no limit. So the debt is in fact a commission on this massive Ponzi scheme. And you're dead right, Martin. There is absolutely no intent to pay it back, because they can't pay it back. Because another part that's quite alarming is that if we paid off all the debt, so if you took all the debt in the world and everyone said, right, we're coming together and we're going to pay off the debt together, there would be no money left in the world. Why? Because more debt has been created than money exists. So you can't pay off the debt, even if you did it through force and said, we're going to pay off this debt. And by the way, who are we paying it off to? We're paying it off to those at the very top of this Ponzi scheme, because if they're creating debt out of thin air because it never existed, the value never existed, and yet governments and you and me have to pay back this money that never existed in the first place. So it can never be paid back because the supply of money in the world circulating doesn't exist, because the money in the first instance didn't exist. It was all created out of thin air. And they have the audacity to say that Bitcoin is the scam. I know the supply of Bitcoin. And even if you want to compare it to gold, no one knows the supply of gold. They can speculate to what they think the supply of gold is. They don't know what the supply of gold is. We do know what the supply of money is. It's infinity. It is infinity. We do know what the supply of Bitcoin is. It's 21 million. We also know what the circulating supply is. Governments can't even track the M1 and M2 money supplies properly because it's all out of whack. It's all insane. It's all madness. Then you actually have the actual counterfeit money of physical cash in itself, where you can see, I can't substantiate this, but there's too many reports that I would suggest can, when you have counterfeiting coming out of North Korea and China, allegedly, and they're printing $100 bills and pouring it into the supply, that messes it with it as well, the total supply of money. You can't do that with Bitcoin. I can't fake Bitcoin. I can't make a fake Bitcoin. I can fork the chain to make a Bitcoin Cash, a Bitcoin Black, a Bitcoin Diamond, a Bitcoin Adam Stokes, and a Bitcoin Martin North. But that doesn't mean that people are going to use it. There is only one Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin is called Bitcoin. So the argument, to expand this a little bit wider, where they say, well, why can't anyone make a Bitcoin? I say, well, you can. Anyone can make a Bitcoin. But here's the difference between your Bitcoin and the Bitcoin. The world has chosen Bitcoin. It's got a ticker of BTC. It has a supply of 21 million. It's been around for 15 years. It didn't need permission from governments. It didn't have a central business that was promoting it. It grew organically. The most powerful currency in the world to grow organically before this was gold. And there was no gold company saying you will use this gold. There was no government saying you must use this. In fact, if anything, they were clipping the ticket, as we've described before. But when it comes to Bitcoin, no one has been forced to use this. It's grown organically, and that makes it incredibly powerful. The next thing that's very powerful about it is that there's no Bitcoin company. There's no one to sue. It's an algorithm on the internet. It's like saying we're going to shut down the internet. You can't shut down the internet. You might want to shut it down in a city or in Australia, but it's going to be in another country. And even when that shutdown has occurred, you turn the internet back on, and the World Wide Web is back. So even if you wanted to shut down all of Australia and say no one's using the internet or Bitcoin, it still exists. It's still circulating. There are hundreds of thousands of nodes around the world. There are millions of miners enabling this system. It's the headless dragon. You cannot stop this. But here's the thing. You don't need to. It is completely open and fair to everyone. Everyone can be part of it. And that is why institutions, individuals, nations, companies, corporations are all buying in, because they cannot afford, whether they like it or not, they cannot afford to stay in the Ponzi scheme of fiat. The biggest scam in the history of humanity is fiat.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, you can see it evident everywhere. And of course, it's just worth reminding everybody that the reason that we had this massive outbreak of inflation was because of the significant increase in the volume of money that was created, as you say, whether it's actually created from thin air or whether it's just a book entry. But the net result of the stimulus programs, which of course was government backed through the bond system, central banks who actually took interest rates really low, but also threw money into the banking system through, example, in Australia, the Term Funding Facility. It should be absolutely no surprise that we created the inflation problem because we flooded the world, particularly the Western world, with yet more money. And guess what? It leads to raging inflation. Now they're trying to put the genie back in the bottle, but they're doing it without actually tackling the underlying issue that there's more and more debt in the system. And it's clear to me that the political system in the US is not capable of dealing with reducing debt. So debt will continue to increase. And what that essentially means is that we're on a one-way path to nowhere. So that then takes us into, well, what are the alternatives? And that's, of course, where the Bitcoin, and we'll touch on some other crypto conversations a bit later through this show. Now, I wanted to just pick up a couple of questions that people threw in the chat a little earlier. One is from Down Under Drover, who said, how much energy do miners need to generate one Bitcoin? Because, of course, there was always a suggestion previously that this was an environmentally unfriendly thing to do, but it's changed a bit, hasn't it now?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. So I can't tell you exactly how many gigawatts or kilowatts is required to make a Bitcoin, but I can say this. Bitcoin is in fact one of the most, if not the most efficient monies in the world. Now, hear me out. The mainstream will tell you Bitcoin bad because it uses lots of energy. Now, if you remember 2 episodes ago, I spoke about dryers, tumble dryers using more electricity than the Bitcoin mining system. And one of the viewers did ask for a reference, and I did provide that reference to you after the show. But Bitcoin mining is mobile. So I want you to think about it, the banking system. The banking system, I want you to think about, and I'm not dodging the blame. I'm going to paint the picture here because it's a really good picture and a question, and it should be answered. When we run financial systems traditionally, we have these really big buildings that require lots of energy to build them. First of all, you've got to get all the raw materials. You build these big buildings, you put them in the middle of cities, they have all the glass, all the fit outs, all the people that are moving there every day, all the heating, all the cooling, all the people who go there who are having breaks, and all the inefficiency of banks, all the refits, all the refurbs, everything that goes into making a multi-story building in the middle of a city that operates 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Now, where that electricity comes from is these centre cities or city centres where they need electricity to run it in downtown, pick your city. And it's very inefficient. It burns immense amounts of energy, and it is very, very bad for the environment to rip up all the raw materials to build this. Then you have the servers within those within those banks, these massive banks of servers within banks themselves that are using unforeseeable amounts of electricity, way more than Bitcoin, way, way, way more than Bitcoin, as well as all the cooling to cool down those servers and so forth. So the banking industry uses way more energy than Bitcoin, but it's only available to those who have the right papers, the right shoes to get into the bank, and the right documents, as well as it's only open 9 to 5, 5 days a week. And if I want to do an international transaction, it's immensely inefficient, immensely inefficient. If I want to send money to you right now in England, Martin, I could send it right now and it wouldn't get to you till maybe Friday. If there's any glitches, it would happen on perhaps next Monday. Yet if I was going to send you crypto, any crypto, it would be to you within seconds, if not minutes. And also the transaction fee would be much lower. So we have a much more efficient system. But when it comes to the energy, what's actually happening is these Bitcoin miners are innovating very quickly because the whole back end of what they do is energy efficiency. So they are moving to wherever the energy is free or in excess. And yes, there is a lot of free energy or in excess energy within planet Earth. For example, if I have a big mining farm, first of all, I don't need a big building like, I don't know, CBA in the middle of Sydney. I don't need all the shiny glass. I don't need all the people working in there. I don't need all the cleaning and the fit outs and all the prime time real estate. I move that mining farm to where the energy is free or in excess. It might be geothermal springs anywhere in the world. And yes, I need an internet connection, but that internet connection is much easier. It can even be a satellite internet connection. It doesn't have to be hardwire. I just need an internet connection to pick up what's happening on that mining algorithm. But then I can move these mining rigs, if you will, to where the energy is also in excess. As example, when they flare gas mining companies, as example, when they flare gas and that gas is just burnt into the atmosphere, we can now say, and it's already happening. The miners go, hey, mining company, you know all of that gas that you don't use and you just flare it into the atmosphere and it doesn't do anything. Would you like us to capture that? And instead of it just burning into the atmosphere, we can capture that, we can recycle that energy that was otherwise burnt and put it into our mining rigs, and we can give you a bit of a profit for it. And the mining companies say, yeah, that's fantastic. That reduces some of our costs, which actually flows on to the customer because we can reduce some of their costs. And the mining companies, as in the Bitcoin miners, are now running their mines, their mining rigs, on energy that was otherwise just being burnt into the atmosphere. You then have, if you might go to nuclear power plants or coal plants or any plant that is generating electricity, you have peak times and off-peak times. Because this is a dynamic system that is very reactive, we can in fact tap into the excess energy that is not being used in off-peak times and say, right, you've got all of this energy that you're not using during the off-peak times. Can we tap into that? And of course, you can offset it. So when it's an off-peak time in America compared to Australia, because it's essentially the internet of money, as opposed to a business hour in downtown Sydney where it's 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you can in fact dynamically capture energy that is being wasted all around the world. So what this does is it captures all of this wasted energy that would otherwise be flared into the atmosphere or not being used during peak systems, and you can redirect it into the most efficient and fairest financial system in the history of humanity. You might want to look at the gold industry as an example. So the gold industry, they say, well, this precious metal is really good because gold and I can touch it. Do you know how much environmental destruction is done to the earth ripping this gold out of the ground? Besides the energy that's used in all the trucks, all the smeltering, a smeltering factory uses so much energy to melt that gold, so they can take a block of gold and put it into a vault. When we use this energy, it actually secures the most powerful and secure payment system in the history of humanity that anyone can be part of. So when you actually compare, and people are coming around to this now, because the narrative was Bitcoin bad because it uses energy. It absolutely uses energy, lots of energy. Nowhere near as much as the banks, nowhere near as much as gold, nowhere near as much as tumble dryers. Yet the difference is everyone can be part of it. And the energy that is required, the mining rigs, is completely mobile. Pick a waterfall, pick a geothermal spring, pick a gas flaring plant, pick a nuclear power plant, a coal power plant, pick anything. These innovators, when it comes to crypto mining, they are moving to where the electricity is free or in excess, and as a result, it's good for the environment.
Yeah, and I'll just make one other point. I don't know whether you've been following this, but of course, AI has been massive, and the growth of AI has been massive in recent times. And if you now look at the amount of energy that the AI system is using, it's considerably more than actually the mining for Bitcoin. So there's yet another example of an unequal playing field. And I find this quite interesting. It almost seems to me that the power consumption argument was being muscled by those who were trying to rubbish Bitcoin on any basis they possibly could. And the fact of the matter is that you look around the world and there are many other things that use way more energy. And interestingly, of course, the miners, and I could put this slide up, there are some big miners out there like Marathon Digital and Riot Platforms who've actually, definitely institutionalized a lot of this mining capability. Interesting to see their returns 2023 and 2024. So it's worth, I think, highlighting the fact that these miners are not just individuals, right? There are large corporations mining as well.
Yeah, and a good chart there. Remember, miners don't want to use electricity. The whole back end, let's compare it to a bank. Does a bank really care how much energy it uses? I mean, really think about it. If it did, it wouldn't have these glorious and beautiful looking buildings that take so much resources out of the ground to build it and then refit it and then heat it and then cool it and then have people drive to work, which burns energy, and then all the paper within it that wastes trees and energy, and all the computer systems that run it and all the files that they can control and corrupt. If they are really keen about saving the environment, they say, right, everyone's working from home, or they do something that is very efficient, like moving their big buildings to where the energy is free or in excess, but they can't do that. So what does this mean? Banks make their money off printing money out of thin air and fees. That's how they make their money. Interest rates, fees, printing money out of thin air. Miners make their money out of the efficient use of electricity. Now really think about that everyone put your philosopher hats on. If your business makes money from charging fees and interest rates, and as I just described what banks do, energy is not on the forefront of your mind. It's like, oh yeah, well, they could reduce their cost in electricity comparative to what they make money in through everything I've just described. Their electricity bill is virtually nothing. And by the way, it's a tax deduction. But when your whole business as a crypto miner is in fact all of my income comes from electricity. Yes, there's hardware, absolutely, but you can get a good return on that hardware. The real cost is the electricity. So as a result, you will, in fact, it's already happening. The crypto mining companies are leading the charge in environmental innovation to make electricity more efficient. They are looking at ways of driving all of us forward as a society, even if you're in Bitcoin or not. How do we get more efficient energy? And in fact, how do we reduce some of the strain on the grid by saying, hey, that massive building that takes all of that electricity out of the grid during peak hour, you don't even need that anymore. Get rid of the whole thing and we'll run the entire financial system over in Greenland on a geothermal spring and over out in the Northern Territory where there's some random company that is flaring gas. We'll take all the load off the city that the banks have been chewing off you, and we'll do it remotely. And in fact, that makes it better for everyone else, because guess what? That makes everyone else's electricity cheaper, because now you're taking some demand off the old grid, because there was so much demand from the old financial systems. A good example, when you said, when it came out, all the competition was saying Bitcoin bad, it's bad for the environment. We continually see this out throughout history. When a new innovation comes out, someone goes, oh, it's bad because of this. I wasn't alive, but the horse and cart. You had the horse and cart. And of course, when cars came out, they said, oh, well, you can't have cars because look at that bad stuff that's coming out the back. It's like, our horses are good because they've got feet instead of wheels, or hooves instead of wheels, and the poo that comes out the back is nowhere near as bad as the gas. And of course, they did everything in their power to stop this innovation moving forward. Then you can see when, smoking as an example, I'll go to the other example, when smoking, it was clear that smoking was bad for us. They said, no, it's good for you. And that's what fiat is. Fiat is bad for us. And of course, the fiat companies in this figurative example, they're the tobacco producers. They're saying, oh, no. This fiat stuff that we use, it's good because we can control it, and it's good to keep economies stable. So you definitely don't want that Bitcoin thing, because if you use that Bitcoin thing, we're not going to be able to control all of these levers that we've been doing in the past. And in fact, we'll lose our profits. I don't say that part. So that thing is bad. Use our poison. We've seen it with cigarettes. We've seen it with sugars. We've seen the horse and cart. We've seen it with telephones. We've seen it with the radios. We've seen it with the printing press. Every single innovation, world-changing innovation or technology that comes out, the competition says, no, we can't have that. It's bad. And then over time, everyone uses it, everyone adopts it, and we are now in a situation when you mentioned with AI. There's an argument that AI will take away a lot of jobs. Well, tractors were argued to take away a lot of jobs, but then it created a lot more efficiency. Computers were argued to take away a lot of jobs, but it created more efficiency. And Bitcoin is argued, or AI is argued, to take away a lot of jobs. It's going to create a lot more efficiency and a lot more opportunity. And as a society, as a civilization, we continue to move forward as we free up labor from the old mundane tasks of driving to a bank 9 to 5 days a week, where we can now innovate in something new, something better to move us all forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, innovation is part of the human spirit. And certainly the question is, how are those innovations harnessed? Because they can be harnessed for good, or they can be harnessed for evil. And I would argue that sometimes, unfortunately, the commercialization of those innovations effectively end up trapping us and, being negative rather than positive. But that shouldn't stop the innovation in the first place. It seems to me we should be thinking hard about how we use stuff rather than, stopping new ideas. I want to pick up this question here, which came in from Kimber a little while ago. Can I hold my Bitcoin for a long time, say 10 to 15 years, like set and forget, and add to it now and then? Will this be profitable? And of course, if you look back over the past, 15 years or however long, Bitcoin's been around, the answer is it's been highly profitable.
Kimberly, great asset. So yes, you can hold it for as long as you want. And had you done that, you would, it's the best performing asset in human history. So had you bought $100 of this 15 years ago, you'd be a multi-millionaire. Nothing has performed as well as Bitcoin ever in any sector. Now, some people say, well, Adam, that's from 15 years ago. I say, okay, bring up the 3-year, the 5-year, the 10-year, the 2-year. Bring up your chart, and Bitcoin has beat all of it. And so as we move forward to the next 15 years, as I said at the beginning of the show, look around. Every single thing you own around you is losing value against Bitcoin. All of it. Bitcoin continues to move forward. And that's a pretty bold statement, but it's a matter of fact, and I can prove it. But, the first purchase that we know of was 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. Now that 10,000 Bitcoin would probably buy you most pizza companies in the world. It'd probably buy you Domino's. And it's an example of this thing just keeps growing in purchasing power. The word value is a very interesting word. What is value? Well, is it valuable to me? Is it valuable to you? Because for some people, value lies in, I don't know, a baseball card or a pretty car or a holiday, and value is different things to different people. So I say, you know what, park that argument aside. Let's talk about purchasing power. What is the purchasing power of Bitcoin? Well, comparative to every other currency in the world, Bitcoin has more purchasing power than any of them. It keeps going up. And I can prove it. In fact, if you compare the purchasing power of the United States dollar to Bitcoin over the last 15 years, the United States dollar has lost 99% of its purchasing power in 15 years. Just in 15 years, comparative to Bitcoin, 99% of its purchasing power has gone. And yet the mainstream has the audacity to say that Bitcoin is a scam and the dollar is good. You've lost 99% of your purchasing power against the best performing asset in the world. And it continues to go up. We continue to get more and more and more purchasing power. So when we talk about value, I'd say park that question or that word or that description. And the last time we were speaking, Martin, I brought up a chart. I showed you a chart where you need more money to buy a house now, but you need less Bitcoin to buy a house. I need a lot of money, a lot of dollar units to buy a house. But now to buy a house with Bitcoin, I need less than 10 Bitcoin and I can buy a house. In fact, in some instances, I only need 4 or 5 Bitcoin, maybe 3 Bitcoin, depending where you're buying, 3 Bitcoin to buy a house. Whereas in the past, I needed 20,000 Bitcoin to buy a house, 100,000 Bitcoin to buy a house. So over time, the purchasing power of Bitcoin continues to go up, and the purchasing power of any fiat anywhere in the world, I don't care which one you pick, they're all going down. We just refer to the US dollar a lot on this channel and on my channel because it's the global reserve currency. It has the center of gravity for all money around the world. And if you read The Creature from Jekyll Island and Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you start to realize this Ponzi scheme has to end. And we now have a solution. The solution is Bitcoin. And I acknowledge people say, I don't like Bitcoin. I say, okay, show me a better solution. I'm open to it. I'm here. And I even invite you onto the channel. I am ready to be humbled, but I have been putting this offer out for 7 years. Show me something better than Bitcoin comparative to the US dollar, and I'm all in. And the only thing I get sometimes is gold. And I say, I can prove gold hasn't worked. Why can't we use gold? I can't use gold on the internet. I can't use gold with my friend. I can't use gold at the supermarket. So what I have to do is I have to put that gold in a centralized vault, and they write a note against it, and we're back to fiat because then there's a double spend on it. We delink the gold from fiat. We've done it before. That doesn't mean I'm against gold. I hold gold, and it's not binary. It's not like you can only have Bitcoin or you can only have gold. No, not at all. It's like saying, well, you can only have men or you can only have women, or you can only have a car or you can only have a truck. No, of course not. You can have many things. You need many things. You need all of these things to make a society work. But when it comes to the anchor point, which you and I have explored many times, what's a supply of gold? We don't know. We have no idea. We know we've pulled out 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools out of the ground. But for all we know, there could be 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools already pulled out of the ground and they're holding it like diamonds and slowly releasing. I don't know. I can't see it. I can't prove it. And even if I did know all the gold was in a vault, well, what about the demurrage costs? How do I audit that gold? Do I go in there and count it? And who gets to count it? Me, you, everyone, China, Russia? And how long will that take? And then how do we test the purity of the gold? It's so inefficient. It doesn't mean gold doesn't have a value. It doesn't mean gold won't be around for a long time. It means it cannot and will not be the global reserve currency. And even if we look at BRICS as an example, BRICS breaking away, they're giving it a go. But here's a go. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and Saudi, and many other countries are coming into it. It's not just those 5 nations. I think there's about 30 who are signing up to BRICS. How do we know how much gold there is? Are we going to say, right, Russia's going to hold the gold, or China's going to hold the gold, or India's going to hold the gold? And then how do they trust each other? I don't trust you, you don't trust me, they don't trust us, and we don't trust them. So then we remove the trust, and that's what Bitcoin is. It's trustless. You don't need trust. You can all see it on the blockchain. We're all playing the same game. We all know it's hard. We all know it's scarce. We all know what the supply is. So it doesn't matter if I like you or you like me or we don't like them or vice versa. We know that we have this hard, immutable, open, neutral money that everyone can be part of. Gold isn't quite that yet, because gold must be centralized if we're going to use it efficiently, because I can't use gold on the internet, I can't use gold at the shop, and I can't use gold with my friend. If you say, oh yeah, Adam, you can use it with your friend, how do you know it's real gold? Like really, how do you do it? Oh, I've got a gold coin in my hand. Okay, well what? Now I've got to drill it, and I've got to test for the purity, and I've got to do an alchemy test every time I use a bit of gold, and every time I drill it, I lose a bit of gold because little flakes disappear. And you say, well, I know what I'll do, Adam. I will make gold coins molded into the shape of a Roman Empire, and then it's definitely a real coin. Okay, well, let's go through history. What happened there? They clip the ticket, they dilute the gold, they make fake gold, they get a piece of lead in modern times, they spray paint it gold. So gold is not the answer. All we've got is Bitcoin. But again, to end this rant, and I realize it's a big rant, I am open to a better solution. And I keep putting it out there. Show me a better solution. I am all ears and I'm all in. But after 15 years of Bitcoin and hundreds of years of the collapse of fiat and thousands of years of gold, we have no better fair money and transportable money than Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an interesting challenge. And you mentioned gold, and of course, gold has been performing relatively well recently. One of the reasons for that is that a lot of central banks, including the Bank of China, has been buying gold, but also a lot of individuals in China have been buying gold. And I thought this was an interesting chart. This is actually the price of gold in China's yuan, because of course the yuan has devalued against the US dollar. So in fact, given the uncertainty that exists in China at the moment, with the property market going backwards and the overall economy relatively weak post-COVID, more ordinary Chinese are actually buying into gold, and they're benefiting from the weaker exchange rate against the US dollar. So that is an interesting observation. But it does also beg the question as to whether, in fact, gold can be that value anchor. And I think it's just worth coming back to that concept again, because the question is, where do you hang the tail on the donkey, as it were? Where is that value measure point? Because depending on the answer to that, you get very different answers. Are others being devalued against it or not? And that's why this is quite a critical question. And I think it's worth just underscoring what you said again. The supply of gold is limited but not totally known. It's also being hoarded by certain entities. And that, of course, is a sign of worry about other asset classes. And, of course, the financial system, as we've said earlier, is fiat. So there is a really open question as to, well, is there something better than Bitcoin? But so far, if you think about it in future-proofing terms, you can see why there's an attraction. And just going on to that, I want to pick up this question from Cookie, because Cookie said, out of the world of all cryptos, how many are worthy? And that's, I think, just the next logical point, right? Because we've been talking about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is the mother of all cryptos, but it's not the only one.
Great question and great segue as well. Thank you, Cookie Boy. Okay, so there are, according to latest research, which is a quick Google research, there are 420 million cryptos out there. So let's put things into perspective. How many websites are there? There are, according to latest research, there are 1.1 billion web pages out there. 1.11 billion web pages out there. So which ones have value? Well, most of them have some sort of value to someone, but which ones are the most profitable? Well, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. They're the big ones. They're the big 5 to 6 that have the most value in the world. But again, there's 1.11 billion websites, and the top 6-ish, maybe top 10, have the most value. You also have eBay as an example that was very powerful at one stage. So you say, well, hang on a second. Does that mean all of the other websites are a scam? Well, not necessarily. Some may be, absolutely. But some just have more value to more people. So now we bring it back to the internet of value. So we think of the World Wide Web and the internet as the internet of information. What we're doing right now, we're using Web 2, we're passing information verbally and visually over the internet right now, the internet of information. Then you can do Google searches for text and video and so forth, and it's the internet of information. But now we transit to the internet of value. And the internet of value is a concept that we really have to sort of grasp, because think pre-internet, which I can barely remember, but pre-internet, when the internet came out, most people thought the internet was email, because email was like, well, hang on, the internet means that I send a message from me to you, so that's the internet. It's like, no. That was an application on the internet. And blockchain, or Bitcoin rather, Bitcoin is to blockchain as email is to the internet. That is, Bitcoin was the, if you will, the first and most known and the most understood application of Web3, or the blockchain, or the internet of value. But that is not what the internet of value is. It's just one application on the internet of value. Now we go into all the other altcoins, and we say altcoins because they are alternative to Bitcoin. So you have Bitcoin, and if you look at all the money in crypto, over $1 trillion at the moment, about 52% of that value in dollars is locked up in Bitcoin. So what's this other 47% in? The other 47% is made up of 420 million other cryptos. The real ones at the top are about 22,000. Now, some of them are all, well, hang on, most of them, to be clear, most of them are going to zero in a financial term. That is, what is the value of the token related to that cryptocurrency? Well, in 5 years, it's going to go to zero. And most of them are doing that. And you don't really get an argument from anyone in the crypto space. But there's a lot of them that are going to do returns similar to Bitcoin. Hundreds of thousands of X, tens of thousands of percent, hundreds of percent. There's going to be a broad spectrum of all of these coins doing different things. Massive returns, but way bigger Way, way, way bigger than anything you can do in the traditional financial space. But this is where the lines get blurry. So, well, hang on, it's just a big casino. Well, to an extent, absolutely. That's what the stock exchange is. The stock exchange is one big casino. But the difference with the stock exchange is you can actually do research into the company that is selling that share. Equally, the same is with the internet of value. If you want to say it's a big casino, cool. You won't get an argument from me out of there. But the thing is, I can research these coins. I can look at the founders. I can say, well, what does it do? What's its value? What's its applications? What's its use case? What's its competition? And then I can actually research it as opposed to going into a casino and saying $1,000 on black. That's just completely random. Whereas when we do stocks or cryptos, you can actually do some research to mitigate your risk and to increase your chance of winning, if you will, in the crypto casino, just as the same you can do in winning in the stock exchange casino. But where it's exciting here is because the market caps are so small. You can come in here and a market cap can be $100. And if that market cap then goes to $500 million, which we've seen do very quickly, and you had some of those coins, you are now a multi-millionaire in weeks and months. It happens over and over again. Now, to be clear, for every one that wins, thousands lose. But unlike the lotto or the casino, first of all, you can do your research. But second of all, the odds are way better. The odds are incredibly impressive. So crypto is not one thing, it's many things. Bitcoin is one application on the blockchain. And there are two sides to crypto when you move past that. One side is speculation. And most people in the mainstream are saying, oh, they're all just gamblers, they're just all Lambo boys, and they're just trying to make some money. It's like, well, you know what? We are making a lot of money in here. And yeah, we were bought here for the Lambos, but we stayed for the revolution. But then there's the other side of it is, in fact, there's all this development on here, and we are changing finance forever. Just as cars changed everything forever, just as the internet changed things forever, just as electricity changed things forever, and the printing press, and penicillin, and all of these technological advancements, those who got in, the consequence of getting in early, the consequence was that they made a lot of money. But that wasn't necessarily what it was about. If you invested in, I don't know, the Ford Motor Company early, you'd be rich. If you invested in Amazon early, you'd be rich. But it's not just about making money. Ford makes cars that enable a lot of businesses to make other money in other things, providing different services. It's not just about the car and the share price of Ford. The same is with Amazon. Amazon, if you got in early, or Google, take your pick, there's so many out there. Sure, you would have made a lot of money if you invested early, but Google isn't just about buy low and sell high. Google is about thousands or hundreds of applications that you can use on the Google platform, whether it's a search engine, an email, or a map, or take your pick. That these platforms enabled you to do a lot of stuff. And the same is with the internet of value. The internet of value is saying, you know what? There are two sides. One, get in early, buy low, sell high. But the other side is like, hang on a second, I can actually use this to do business. And one of those businesses, there's many businesses that you can do in the internet of value, is banking, or DeFi is the big one, decentralized finance. I don't need a bank anymore. Why would I go to a bank that holds my money, can lose my money, is protected through bail-in and bail-out laws, charges me fees, takes 3 days to do an international transaction if it goes through, and charges me a fortune on it? I have to adhere to their centralized interest rate. They are protected by the powers that be that can let them do anything they want with their money. Why do I need a bank? I don't need a bank. It's like saying, if I was going to send you a message right now, why on earth would I get out my quill and dipping ink and write a letter and then seal it up with a wax stamp and then go down to the post office and then put it on a wooden sailing ship to wait for it for 6 weeks to get to the other, or 6 months to get to the other side of the world if I'm on a wooden sailing ship? So maybe you can get that letter. Why would I do that when I can just text you? The same is with money. Why on earth, in an international marketplace, why on earth would I go to a centralized body who takes my money and controls it and sends it from this person to that person to this person to that person, taking their interest rate, their cut, their fee, their exchange rate, when I could just text you the money? And you say, now, which money? And I say, any money you want. Do you want Litecoin? Do you want Bitcoin? Do you want Ethereum? Do you want a stable coin? Do you want a coin pegged to the US dollar or a coin pegged to the British pound sterling? I can do any of it. You take your pick. That's not the question. The question is, why on earth would I not use that? Why on earth would I say, no, I don't want the ability to text value to anyone anywhere in the world who's got a mobile phone. I want to, in fact, go to that centralized body that's open 9 to 5, 5 days a week, that has a long queue at the and no ATMs, who can block and seize my money, who take 3 to 4 days to send something. I can send a movie instantly, but I can't send $2 on a digital screen. Why would I use that institution? And that's why the future of money. You think a young person is going to say, oh yeah, I choose not to use cryptocurrency. I choose to use that prehistoric building over there that's open 9 to 4. I was saying 5, but it's really 9 to 4, 5 days a week, closed for weekends, closed for public holidays. They get control of my money. I have to get their permission to use the money. I've got to pay them fees to that. Yeah, I choose not to use this open, immutable, borderless censorship money. I choose to use that financial system. It's insanity. It is absolutely absurd to think the future generations are going to use a bank over crypto. It's like saying to the kids, hey kids, none of you are going to use TikTok or YouTube or Instagram or Google. All of you are going to pull out the Monopoly board and roll the dice on the board and play like we did in the olden days. They'd tell you to get stuffed. And the same is with the financial system. There is no way they're going to use the old financial systems, and the banks know it. They bloody well know it. The banking system is done, and the only way they can grip it up is through force, which means through violence. And this is why fiat is a money of war and Bitcoin is a money of peace. No one's forcing you to use Bitcoin. You can just choose to use it, and the market is choosing to use it. But when we go on, as I digress a little bit, when we go into the applications, DeFi is a big one we're looking at. The power of DeFi, which is so amazing, is that if I want to get a loan, say, I'll go extreme. If I'm a poor farmer in Bangladesh and I want to buy a shovel, but I haven't got $25 because I don't have a credit card and I can't get into a bank because I don't have the papers and I don't have shoes and they won't even let me in the front bank. How on earth am I going to get a loan for $25? Well, with decentralized finance and application on the internet of value, you can go to the free market and say, who wants to lend me $25? Now, most people will say no, but again, because crypto is infinitely divisible, you can go to the free market and say, hey, are there 25 people who want to lend me $1? Yeah, I haven't got any trust for you yet. All right, well, how about 100,000 people who want to lend me less than a cent? Yeah, okay, we can do that. So what happens then? That farmer, I'm a lender. So I say, all right, I don't know who this guy is, and he hasn't got any star rating yet because he's new to the platform, but I'm willing to risk 1/100th of a cent on someone I don't even know. Go for it. And then he pays, he gets all of this money and he buys his shovel and he pays back. So I go, oh yeah, this guy was good. And just like an Uber or an Airbnb, I say, yeah, he paid back in time. Here's a 5-star rating. He gets some confidence in the ecosystem. He buys his shovel. He now has the capability to make some more money. So now he wants a wheelbarrow. He does the same thing. I'm happy to lend him now 1 cent because he paid back the 1/100th of a cent. He pays back. I get a little bit of interest. I get a little bit of reward. He gets his wheelbarrow and his shovel. Then he wants a donkey. Then he wants a tractor. Then he wants a farmhouse. And because he's built trust with me, I can in fact lend him money at an interest rate of what, 1%, 2%, whatever the market determines. Not 6, 12, 15%. It's whatever the free market determines. So what happens in this example? The poor farmer in Bangladesh, or pick your country, I don't know why I picked that country, but it could be Australia where I want to get, I don't know, a pair of shoes or whatever, it doesn't matter. He or she gets access to money they otherwise would not have been able to get access to because a bank won't give it to them. They build their wealth through building their farm in this example that I'm providing. But me at the other end of this application of the internet of value, I get to become the bank myself. I get to lend money and I get to become profitable in lending money to anyone. You say, well, hang on a second, it's too risky. Well, as I said, you start off with a small amount, and just like with Uber, it's like Uber will never work. You're never going to trust the people. They're never going to pay. Oh, well, you'd be amazed how well the rating system works. Oh, Airbnb will never work. Well, the biggest hotel chain in the planet is Airbnb, and they don't own a single building. The biggest taxi driving company on the planet is Uber, and they don't own any vehicles. And the biggest lenders in the world will be you and I, and we don't own any bank buildings. And this is an exciting example of where people are going to make lots of money at both ends. It's going to be a win-win. And of course, who's left out of this equation, Martin? Well, the banks are left out of it, of course. They don't get the interest rates. They don't get to vet the people. You and I are going to compete with them. So two people are competing with them. One, the customer is now competing with the banks because they're going out to different banks. So they've got competition there. But two, the lender is competing because they're saying, well, actually, I don't even need a bank now. And all of this can be done through the power of decentralized finance. Banks are done. They know it. They're going to do everything in their power to hold their control over these civilizations. whether that's through fractional reserve lending powers or bail-in powers or bail-out powers, all of those powers are now coming into question. Why on earth would one central body have the right to run in market failure and then be bailed out or bailed in with our taxes or savings, when the free market would not do that for a cafe? They wouldn't do it for a shop. They wouldn't do it for a construction company. Yet we do it for the companies and the entities. Their sole job is money, and they keep blowing it. Pick your global financial crisis, pick the next one, pick inflation, pick interest rates. There is no way they're going to be able to reduce interest rates. Why? Because inflation's not under control. And why isn't inflation under control? Because they keep printing money. Not because I bought a loaf of bread, but because they keep printing it.
And I will just make the point that it's not just banks, but also think about central banks, right? Central banks are also very concerned about the evolution of the financial system and the risks attached to it. One of the reasons why they are experimenting with central bank digital currencies. And one of the things we are seeing is this sort of contention between the distributed finance, the Bitcoins of this world and those sorts of things, and central bank digital currencies. Central bank digital currencies in some cases are using some of the same technologies as used in the distributed finance world. But the idea is to keep control of the levers of finance. And I think for me, that's one of the critical tussles that we're in the middle of at the moment. And I've highlighted, I think, on previous shows that I'm very concerned about the evolution of central bank digital currencies overlaid with digital ID, which is now, all but passed in Australia, and social scores and those sorts of things. So there is a controlling mentality, centralized mentality. And, that the evolution is to put those tentacles out through the electronic systems as well. Whereas, of course, the devolved, decentralized finance that we're talking about is completely different because it doesn't have the same checks and balances and controls. I guess the other side of the question here, and I come back to...
Before you do, can I just touch on your CBDC?
Let me just finish what I'm going to say because it's very connected. The other point there is what happens when the power goes off, right? And that is a question that has to be tackled not only for decentralized, but also through central bank digital currency world too. We saw when, the Optus thing happened or when CBA's app disappeared, what happens when the power goes off? And what happens if it goes off not just for a few hours, but for days?
Okay, so part one, the CBDC. The irony about the CBDC is that retail banks could in fact be on our side to fight against the CBDC. Why? Because when money is printed or created or loaned or whatever we want to say, the commission is paid. The central banks get the first cut and then they pass it to the retail banks and then it gets filtered out into the people. And the retail banks or the institutional banks, they get a cut along the way. Now, what a CBDC says is it says, hey, we don't actually need you banks anymore. Even a CBDC in itself is saying what I'm saying. Why do I need a bank? Why on earth would I need that central body to pass money from the central printing machine and the central printing machine can just drop it into Martin North's wallet or Adam Stokes' wallet? Why do I need these retail banks at all? And the retail banks are like, oh my God, we're getting flanked here. We're getting flanked from the people who no longer need our Ponzi scheme at the bottom. And we're getting flanked from the people at the top who no longer need our Ponzi scheme to pass that imaginary money through us. So the irony on the CBDC is that they will actually be lobbying against governments to say, no, we're on a good wicket here. You can't have a CBDC, otherwise our entire banking industry is decimated and the Fed equivalent or RBA equivalent can just pass money directly to the people. So that's one part. Now you go into what happens when the power is out. It goes back to what I said at the beginning of our interview. We're already in a digital space. And I agree. What will happen when the power goes out? And we can see what happened when the power goes out. When the power goes off, we move to bartering. And if you say, well, hang on, Adam, what if there's two parts to it. In the short term, what do we do when the power goes off? It's like, yeah, fair enough. And you know what I say, Martin? You pull out this thing. This is called a mobile phone, right? So you say, well, hang on, all the power goes off. Yeah. In many instances, not all, but in many instances, you've still got telecommunications. And this is a bank, not a link to a bank, but a banking system where I can use this on the blockchain. So that's your layer one. When the power goes out, in many instances, the telecommunication towers don't go out. And so, well, hang on, they lose power. Okay, well, you put backup generators on all of the telecommunication systems. You're not going to have it on every shop. You probably have it on every hospital, but you're not going to have it on every corner shop, every this, every that, every house. But you can have it absolutely on every mobile phone cellular tower. And that gives us redundancy there. So in the first instance, if it's a temporary or short-term power outage, we need to ensure that the telecommunication systems, they're up and running. And I'm not talking about the FPOS machines at the shops. Those FPOS machines, although they're a POS, a point of sale terminal, they're linked into an old system going through old banks doing old things. Remember, you can bypass all of that. So then the second part is we'll say, well, Adam, what if there's a catastrophic thing and there's a nuclear war and we lose all the miners and all this? And I say, do you really think that any currency is important then? Or do you think, in fact, food, water, shelter, rice, and medical supplies comes in? So on one extreme, you go to the bartering economy. We've done that for the history of humanity. You go back to bartering. but in the short term, where we had, it's a great example, you have floods or fires, and suddenly the power is out at Woolworths, where you could in fact have the telecommunication mobile systems with a generator running there, at least to fill the gap for a few days. And you say, well, what do you do beyond then? I say, well, look, I'm for cash. I have never said I'm not for cash, and you and I absolutely know the battle that we've been through for cash, but that's beyond us now. We've already lost cash. Cash is gone. You may have some cash in your wallet now, but they're phasing it out. Many banks don't even have cash on their terminals. Australian, as I mentioned before, Australian government shop fronts don't accept their own cash. So what is the solution? The solution is a decentralized money that doesn't require centralized systems. The centralized systems are those banks and point of sale terminals that are going through centralized banks. You need telecommunication systems that can pass that information. Beyond that, you have bartering. But if we can have cash, I'm all for cash, but I have to accept reality. People don't like cash. And there's a comment there saying cash is king. Cash flow is king. But no, cash is expensive to move. It's dirty, it's slow, it's cumbersome. And any company, that's why many companies are not accepting cash now, because it's so heavy and slow to use. And I'd say this, and I've given this example before. Your question is fair. What happens when the power goes out? Absolutely. But to give an extreme example is when we learn to fly, if you will. So, well, what if the engine stops? It's like, yeah, that's really bad. That's catastrophic. If the engine stops, planes fall out of the sky and lots of people die. And it's a really bad situation, worse than not being able to spend your money at the shop. But did we retard the evolution of the aviation industry and the movement of air power in many different forms around the world, because 1 in a million planes fall out of the sky and people die? Now, that might be an extreme example, but it's not. What I'm saying here is, do we want to retard the entire evolution of the financial system and stick with the corruption of fiat and money printing? Because once every 2 years, the power goes out. It's like, so we all want to suffer forever with inflation and money printing and corruption and centralized financial systems, because once every 2 years for 1 day, there's no power. It's absurd when you put it in those parameters and in that example. We have to in fact say, well, okay, the power will go out. What are the redundancy systems that we put in place for when that power goes out? And then the second part is to say, well, what's the risk we're willing to accept? Do we want to accept financial collapse and inflation for 1 day every 2 years that there's no power? Or do we want to accept that risk and mitigate that risk?
Well, I must tell you that I have a very different view on cash. I believe that it needs to be still there. For 3 reasons. The first reason is that when the power goes off for a long period of time, and I look at the recent floods and the recent fires, the only way that people could transact was to actually use cash, and if you didn't have cash, you couldn't transact. Many examples across Australia quite recently. Secondly, cash is completely anonymous. And so there is no tracking transactions. There's no who did you pay, et cetera, et cetera. So it is fungible, completely fungible. And there is no other financial mechanism that has the same fungibility as cash, particularly when the power goes off. The third is that it gives you, therefore, more independence and more ability to, do your own thing, right? And what I'm worried about is being funneled into a central bank digital currency, or being funneled away from using cash, as what the banks have been doing, as they've been closing branches and as they've been ripping out ATMs and making it more and more difficult for people to use cash. I was one of the parties that helped initiate the current inquiry into regional banking. And the thing that's come out there is how critical cash is in the regions where the digital systems just are not up to it. You cannot get internet connectivity. You cannot get mobile phone coverage. So what do? Unless you want to drive 400 kilometers, to go to a branch of a bank, what do? And the answer is, well, if you have cash, you can still use cash. So I think there's a really critical discussion to have here. Cash at the bottom of the pyramid, as it were, enabling individual transactions, needs to be preserved. But it's what happens above that, which is so critical, right? And I actually think there's a really important sort of thought process here about trying to diffuse the global debt bomb and trying to diffuse the fiat. Doesn't mean getting rid of cash. But the final point is, over time, there will be a continued evolution, and that continued evolution will clearly have more digital capability than not. And so there is also an intergenerational aspect to this too, which I think is important. But to my mind, cash is important and needs to stay in the system for as long as people want to use it. It's part of a human right. And by the way, if you offer $10 to buy something, it seems to me that there should be a reason why, a shopkeeper should say, thank you very much, rather than say, oh, we don't handle cash.
I agree. So one of those three I agree with. The other two I'm going to push back on, not because they're wrong, but because perhaps there's a gap in the understanding of crypto. So the number one that you said there is like power goes out in regional areas. We don't have mobile phone connection. I absolutely agree with it. You get no argument from me. I'm a big supporter of cash. The next two you said, the first one was privacy, of which I'm absolutely a big supporter of. Like, if I want to buy a bottle of wine, why does the bank record have to know about it? And we go to a bigger example. If I buy the Quran or the Bible or make a donation to a political party, I'm entitled to privacy. Privacy isn't a crime. Governments are painting privacy as a crime, but it's not a crime. It's in fact a human right. It should at least be a democratic right. And then the third one you said is that it funnels money into centralized systems. So I'm going to not argue at all your first point. We need a system of redundancy for when the power goes out. We park that. I agree with you entirely. The second two, I say crypto solves both of those problems. So we have privacy coins that are impossible to track. One example is XMR. It's called Monero. It is so private that governments have banned it, because governments are scared of privacy. They don't, and it's not partisan here, it's not bipartisan. It's left or right, they're the same. We don't want the people to have privacy because of two reasons: tax and terrorism. If we can't see what you're spending money on, one, you're avoiding tax, and two, you're a terrorist. Those are the reasons why they say you can't have a privacy coin. And XMR, which is the ticker, and Monero is the name of the coin, is an example of pure privacy. That is, whether I buy a Bible or a bottle of wine or donate to a political party or send it to you, no one can see that transaction. And as a result, governments have banned it on exchanges. They said, hang on, whoa, that's too powerful. We don't want you to have it. So privacy absolutely exists in crypto. Not on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not a private coin in the sense that it's not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. We can see that this wallet transacted this much to this person or this other wallet on this date, during this period. We can see that. That's pseudonymous. Everything's on the blockchain. Privacy coins, you can't see any of that. And the governments have stopped that. So privacy, we can put that aside and say, in fact, you know what? It's available on the blockchain. The third part that you said was that it forces us to be funneled into these centralized systems. I say that's where Bitcoin comes in. And even if you don't want to use Bitcoin, you say, well, hang on, Adam, we've got to go onto these blockchains. I say, there are 420 million cryptocurrencies out there. I say, as a believer in democracy, why do I have to use your money? I'm still going to pay my tax. It's not about avoiding tax. And I'm not a terrorist. I'm a veteran. I want to be able to use Litecoin or Bitcoin or Monero or Ethereum, or pick your 420 million coins. I want to use Atom Coin. I want to use Martin Coin. I can use any coin. So where it counters your third point is that crypto says, no, it's not a centralized digital currency. It's not through the Commonwealth Bank or Westpac or pick your bank. It's through peer-to-peer. That's what crypto is about. Peer-to-peer. That means from you to me. And then when we choose the currency, I say, I'll give an example. I've got a provider who he does lots of stuff in the digital space where he does all my graphic design. Now, I don't do my graphic design in Australia because I can't afford the tax. Well, I can, but I don't want to pay the taxes on all of that work here in Australia. I still pay tax on my income, absolutely. But when it comes to the fees of doing that graphic design, I actually go to Romania. I've got a guy in Romania who does all of my graphic design. And I say, well, what do you want to be paid in? And he goes, I want to be paid in Litecoin. I go, okay, well, here you go. I get Litecoin and I send it to him within 3 seconds. It's at him at the other side of the world. At any day of the week, any time of the day, it gets to him instantly. Now, if he wanted Bitcoin or Ethereum, or you might say, well, hang on, he wants a US dollar. I say, okay, well, I'll send you a stable coin. I'll send you any currency you want. I don't need to send you a CBDC. I don't need to send you the Australian dollar. I still pay taxes on my income, but I'm able to pick any money I want. So of the three that you've said there, physical asset that we need when the power goes out, cool, let's work on that and figure out how to do it. Privacy, there are already privacy coins that exist and the governments have banned them because they're so bloody good. And three, not being funneled into centralized areas. You don't need to be funneled into centralized areas with crypto. You can pick any of the 420 million out there. And you can go a step further. You could even make your own cryptocurrency. And if the market determines it has a value, there's your value. And if you don't want to use a crypto that's just floating on the market, you can peg it to the US dollar, which is what a stable coin is.
Yeah, thank you for that. And apologies for the dogs. We had the postman arrive and that got everybody very excited and not much I could do about it. So I apologize. And I did try to mute the microphone, but I was too loose.
We love the dogs.
Too slow.
I have a rooster that often goes off.
No, exactly. So very interesting. Now, look, there was one last question I wanted to touch on briefly, and it was actually asked a little earlier on. Let me just see whether I can find the exact question because... okay, this is the ISO 20022 question, right? And it comes up every time whenever we have a conversation. So let's let's go out on a flourish, right? What are we talking about? Is it important?
It is to some people. So the ISO 20022 is an international standard that refers to which money the people at the top will allow to be used globally. So it's a document written by human beings putting powers over other human beings. Say, hang on, if you're going to use the global financial system, you have to use something that we define in the ISO 20022 document that says, we, you overlords to the peons, we, us overlords to you peons, we say that you have the permission to use these types of money. So it's counter to everything that we're doing here. It's counter to democracy. Why can I only use that standard? Who determines that I'm going to use that standard? I say, look, the ISO 20022 document refers to XRP is one of them, and there's other coins in there saying that the only currency you are allowed to use is these ones here because we approve of them. I say go get stuffed. What are you going to do? You're going to force me to use that money? You're going to use a baseball bat or a bullet against me? And if you are, you're proving my point. You are proving that your money is a money of violence. Now, when it comes to our money, I'm saying, what do you want to use? Do you want to use Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum? Take your pick. There's 420 million coins out there to use. The ISO is saying, no. We dictate what you're going to use. And if you don't use this money, we're going to fine you. And if you don't use that money and you don't pay the fine, we're going to put you in a cage. And if you resist of going into the cage, jail, we're going to come with men with guns and lock you up, which proves that it's a money of violence. And that document supports that money of violence by saying you will use it or you will suffer the consequences. So I say, hey, ISO 20022, go get stuffed because you're no different to fiat, because you're putting your rules for your financial system on me. I'm saying, I don't need you, ISO. I don't need the banks. I don't need your permission. I'm using a permissionless money. And anyone who says I'm not allowed to use a permissionless money, well, that's tyranny, because money is in fact part of freedom. It's not about tax and terrorism. It's not about avoiding tax. It's not about being a terrorist. It's like saying, you know what? I want to buy a bottle of wine and I don't want someone to see it. I want to buy the Quran. I want to donate to that political party. And I don't want to be exposed for all of my financial records. I am going to pay my tax. I am going to pay my fair share. You are going to get me on income tax. You are going to get me on GST. You are going to get me on stamp duty and the hundreds of other taxes that we've got. But when I buy something from here to there, I don't need you to have intricate details of everything I'm doing. You are not my financial overlord. I push back from your rules. I say I am free. I say I fight for democracy, but not through violence, through choice. I choose to use a money of peace. And I hope everyone out there also chooses to use a money of peace and choice and freedom and openness and neutrality and immutability over a money of war and violence and endless printing and corruption and inflation.
Thank you, Adam. Well, believe it or not, we've exhausted another hour and a half, or give or take. And I want to say thank you very much as always. And thanks for all the super chats. And Jason, thank you for yours, and for Kimber's earlier on as well. Really appreciate those. They really help to keep the show on the air. As with all of these things, there will be lots of different opinions. And what I find interesting, I've been watching the chat as we've been speaking, is how diverse the responses are in the chat, and people saying you're wrong, you're right. But the point is, we're having a debate, all right? And for me, the critical thing and the critical opportunity here is to debate some of these issues in hopefully an open way, in hopefully a way that's polite, but also getting into some of the details. So I want to say thank you very much for spending some of your time with us, Adam, tonight. And also, we should tell everybody that Adam listens to me when he's gardening, which is quite a nice thought.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a new recommendation. If you want to listen to the podcast version or the YouTube version while you're gardening, you might find that an extra thing to do. If people want to find out more about you and what you do, Adam, where do they go?
Absolutely. Great discussion tonight. And well done, everyone, for getting involved. I know it's a big turning point for all of us to say, hang on, fiat has been this part of my life forever. What's this new money? There is going to be resistance. And I encourage you to join the community over at the Adam Stokes YouTube channel. It's just Adam Stokes. Read my book, 28 Pro Trader Tips, The Art of Trading. Follow me on X. That's Adam_Stokesy. Or if you want to do anything crypto safely, head over to my company's website, www.thecrypto.land. That's thecrypto.land. Everything on that site is safe and secure. I endorse it. Thank you so much, Martin.
Terrific. Well, we'll have you back on later in the year, of course. This is a very interesting and important debate. I think the next few months will show some very interesting developments in the central bank digital currency world, which should concern us all, I think. And the battle for cash will go on. In fact, next week I've got Robbie Barwick coming on. We're going to talk specifically about the issue of cash, but also, and this is why I've kept you on, because we're also going to talk about war. And why is it that we're getting more and more people talking about war? And, we're talking about we're in the pre-war phase. And I'm very concerned about that. And I actually think there's a direct link between some of the failure in the fiat system and the talk of war. So I'd be interested in, as you leave, to get your quick comment on that, Adam.
Absolutely, and it warrants a whole video in itself. Fiat is a money of war. I wish we spoke about this early. War is coming because it is part of the economic cycle. When I did my economics degree years ago, in fact, even back then, they were talking about war being part of the economic cycle, because as long as we have fiat, we will have war on multiple levels. But one thing, to make it very simple, I can tell you right now, if we had to fund the war machine by taking gold out of our vaults or selling Bitcoin off our wallets, there wouldn't be war unless it was an absolute last resort and in self-defense. But so long as you can print money out of thin air, so to speak, to fund the war machine, there will be countless wars, and those at the top will make immense amounts of profits, whilst the majority of people will be slaughtered through the meat grinder, and there'll be endless suffering, I should say, not suffrage. What we need to do is look for a money of peace. And the money of peace is sitting here right now. Don't get angry at the money of peace. Push back on the money of war.
Absolutely. And Ryan just came in at the end there talking about mass exodus from savings deposits in Aussie dollars and US dollars. I mean, that is part of the the broader canvas here. And it is, I think, a time of uncertainty. And I worry that some of the people, the politicians and those leaders are actually myopically going down a road, but there are alternatives. Adam, thank you very much. I'm going to take you off air now, and I'll look forward to picking up the conversation down the track. See you later.
Cheers, Martin. Love to the dogs. See ya.
Cheers. And just to say that next week, as I say, Robbie Barr will be on, and we're going to be talking about some of those broader issues and also the rumours of war and things, and also pick up the the cash question. So thank you very much indeed for sparing some of your evening with us. This is the doggies. They're now quietly back. You wouldn't believe they'd ever barked. They're just quietly sitting there. So I apologise again for the for the barks, but also for the slight disruption early on, but we got through it. And I want to say thank you very much for spending some of your time with us this evening. So I'm going to sign off now, and I look forward to seeing you next week on the next live show, or indeed check out my other recorded shows. I make shows every day to YouTube. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off, and we'll see you next time. Cheerio.